Alright, back for another installation of the Complete Beginner's Guide to Mandolin here. In this lesson, part 14, we're going to check out some syncopated rhythms. And if you're new to that term, syncopation, all this means is that we're playing notes in kind of unusual parts of the measure, and we're emphasizing beats or places in between the beats that don't normally get emphasized. Let's just think about emphasis for a second here. We've talked about before how your downstrokes are always going to be stronger than your upstrokes, right? That's why we like to place them on the numbered beats in a measure. So if you're playing in 4/4, we have 4 downstrokes. 1, 2, 3, 4. And within those 4 beats, not all those beats were created equal. There's 2 beats that are more strong than the rest. Those are our first and our third beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that's just what our ears have been trained to hear after hundreds of years of listening to Western music, right? And same idea with the waltz time signature that we looked at last time, right? We usually emphasize the first beat out of all the 3 beats in that measure. So it would sound like this. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So when we syncopate a rhythm, we're starting to not emphasize those stronger beats quite as much and emphasize maybe the beats in between those strong beats, or even emphasize some of the notes between the beats. And I think it'll make a lot more sense as you hear these syncopated rhythms work out in this tune that we're going to learn this lesson, an awesome fiddle tune called Shove the Pig's Foot. Check it out here. You know, it still feels pretty straight ahead here, but you can definitely tell there's some syncopated rhythms throughout this melody, right? So let's come over to that transcription and see what's going on. We're on page 40 of our PDF handbook. Again, you can grab one at the link above if you don't have one already. And right off the bat here, we're kind of just thrown in the deep end because we have to learn how to navigate a couple new rhythmic notations. Check out the first phrase of this A section here. So we have this hammer-on that happens on the pickup of the measure, and then we notice that the second note of the hammer-on has this little arc that's connected to the next note across the bar line. I know it's confusing because that looks like the notation that we have for the hammer-on and for the pull-off, but whenever you see 2 notes of the exact same pitch on the same fret that are linked together by one of these arcs, it's actually something different. We call this a rhythmic tie, and what this means is that we're playing the note at the beginning of that tie, and we're letting it sustain through the rhythmic duration of the second note in the tie. So listen to the beginning of this melody again. If we didn't have the tie and played all these notes separately, it would sound something like this. So you can definitely hear the difference there. It sounds a lot more square and uniform whenever you play that second fret on the beginning of that first measure, but it sounds more syncopated whenever you use this tie to let the previous note sustain over the bar line. And another tricky part about this rhythm is what do we do with our right hand to keep alternating in time with the music? So check out the pick strokes above the tablature here. You see we're doing 1 downstroke at the beginning of that hammer-on, and then the next note we're playing after the tie is on an upstroke. That's what we have to do to keep our right hand alternating with the rhythm of the music, right? Normally we play a downstroke at the beginning of a measure, but since we're tying over from the previous bar line, our next note happens on an upstroke. And another weird rhythm that we have here is this quarter note at the end of the phrase that has this tiny little dot next to it, right? Now, I find dotted rhythms kind of confusing, but let me see if I can make sense of this for you. Basically, the dot adds half of the original rhythmic value to the note. In other words, we have a quarter note to start out with, right? But we're taking half of that quarter note, which would be the value of an eighth note, right? And then we're adding an eighth note value to that quarter note. And this dotted quarter note is a little bit unusual, but it is something that does happen in bluegrass and old time music, so it's helpful to know how to read it and how to interpret it. So with all that in mind, let's try playing this first phrase together now. Again, if you notice my right hand there, I'm still just alternating my pick down and up at the same rate no matter what rhythms I'm using. I'm just applying the pick to the string whenever I hear those notes, and that's something really important to keep in mind with all these syncopations. We're not actually changing anything about our right hand technique. All we're doing is we're dealing with more complex rhythms, and we're applying our pick to the strings at different places and moving our hand away from the strings in between those rhythms to keep the time going. So here's the second phrase of the melody. So because of that dotted quarter note that happens at the end of the previous phrase, we just have 1/8 note before the beginning of the third measure here that we're playing with an upstroke. Then the rest of this phrase isn't actually too bad, right? We just have this one hammer on from the open A string to the second fret. Then we have a half note that happens on the second beat of this last measure here, which does feel a little bit syncopated because we're accenting the second beat in the measure instead of those stronger first and third beats like we talked about earlier. So let's try this phrase together as well. All right, phrase 3 is exactly the same as the first phrase, so it's a great opportunity to try out those syncopated rhythms again. Let's give this a whirl. And then that turnaround phrase, the last phrase of this section, starts out the same as phrase 2, it just ends a little bit differently. Check it out. So we have another hammer on from the open A to the second fret. We're also using our open D here. And then at the end, we're playing an open G string along with our 5th fret on our D string to really bring that melody home for the end of the A. All right, let's try that phrase together. I know there's a lot going on there, but whenever you're ready, let's try playing through this A section once together with that backing track. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, for our B section now, we have some even more syncopated rhythms, right? Check out this first phrase. So that first full measure, we have this interesting combination of an 8th note followed by a quarter note followed by another 8th note. And since that quarter note isn't happening on the beat, we're not gonna use a downstroke there. So the pick directions are gonna work like this. We'll play down, up, down, up for that measure there. But again, we're just keeping our right hand moving down and up at the same rate and applying the pick to the strings whenever we hear those notes. So try this out with me. So coming out of that phrase, we have another dotted quarter note to worry about. So the next phrase is gonna start on an upstroke for that solitary 8th note before the next measure. Here's what this sounds like. And this hammer-on we have here is kind of an interesting one because we're using our open E string, hammering onto a quarter note that happens on the 3rd fret of our E string. And since the next note doesn't happen on a beat, we're gonna have to play that last 8th note of the measure with an upstroke right after the hammer-on. Let's try this phrase together now. All right, phrase 3 of the B section is exactly the same as the first phrase, so let's try this again. All right, and the turnaround phrase for this B section is actually a little bit different, so take a listen here. Again, we're doing an upstroke to start this phrase on that last 8th note of the previous measure. Then we have a hammer-on here from the open A to the 2nd fret. And then we have another upstroke on the 3rd fret of the A string to bring us back home to the end of the phrase. Let's try that together as well. All right, so let's check out this B section once through together with the backing track. Here we go. Well, now that you've gone through all those syncopated rhythms and you've tackled both sections here, I think you're ready to play the whole tune. So let's come back over to the backing track now. I'll put the transcription on screen and we'll try playing through the whole form A, A, B, B. Let's try it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, awesome work, folks. If you stuck with this series since the beginning, you've already learned 12 tunes in bluegrass and old-time traditions, which I think is an awesome accomplishment, so congratulations. And we're getting close to the end of this series here, so for the next few lessons, we're going to take a slight shift away from playing the mandolin to talk more about some concepts that will help you get better as you keep progressing here. So coming up for part 15 of the Complete Beginner's Guide to Mandolin, I'm going to be sharing 7 practice tips that I think will help you on your way and help you stay focused to make the most progress you can in the time you have with your mandolin. And you know, one of the best ways to be productive is to watch YouTube videos, right? So be sure to hit like and subscribe here on YouTube. Thanks for checking out the Patreon page and all that, and I'll see you in the next one.